When we lead, learn, and live the way the brain works best, we just get better results with less effort. Today, we are talking about productivity versus busy. Productivity leads to passion and meaning and purpose and a feeling of success and engagement, while busy leads to burnout. So bottom line, if you're wanting to create an entire environment of productive divas, I'll explain more, and you want to decrease busy, this is the video for you. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Yellin. I'm the author of Unforgettable Leadership and really obsessed with helping leaders get better results with less effort by leading, learning, and living the way the brain works best. I would greatly appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button and leave comments. The more we get feedback, the better equipped we are to bring you topics that you find meaningful and valuable. Today's topic, I want to differentiate productivity from busy. Take a deeper dive into why busy carries such great costs. Share with you some ideas of how you can transform your team or your entire organization into a group of productive divas. And then finally leave you with some tips that you as a leader can implement to truly foster a culture that sustains productivity and decreases busy. As this example shows us, busy can carry quite a cost. And we also want to pay attention to what it does to the followers, because busy leaders create exhausted followers. So even the origin of the word busy clues us in here, because if you were to research the origin of the word busy, it actually comes from an Old English word, B-I-S-I-G. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it literally means anxious. So when your brain is on anxious, you are not your high-functioning, focused, collaborative self. We get to work with great organizations and great leaders every single day, and I will say the number one problem we seek to solve is threat. So not all threat is bad. Some threat is really motivating. It causes you to prepare better or to be on high alert. But when I'm talking about negative threat, the negative threat that comes along with this anxiety related to busy, it usually has three different characteristics. One, there's not a lot of clarity. Two, we anticipate adverse consequences. And three, we don't feel like we have a lot of choice or control in the situation. When those things, those kinds of components are present, your brain is under negative threat. The kind of negative threat that shows up when we're simply busy. We don't have a lot of clarity, we're anticipating more of the same, and we don't feel like we have a lot of control over it. So your brain's ability to plan ahead, have the resilience and focus to keep going in pursuit of a goal, to be collaborative, to be open-minded and fluid, that's all compromised. And when your brain is under busy, when your brain is under this anxiety and negative threat, what you get instead is a brain that's reactive. People get really defensive. They get overly attached to their way, overly attached to being right. We get tunnel vision. We're not fluid. We're actually kind of stubborn. And it impacts our immune system, so we're much more likely to get sick. And you're much more likely to start hearing words like overwhelm, burned out, drowning. And so when your brain is under anxiety, especially for a long period of time, that's what you get. And here's the scariest part. That way of being starts to feel familiar. It starts to feel comfortable. In fact, to do anything else starts to feel kind of uncomfortable. So our brain tends to run back to what's familiar, what's comfortable. And maybe the scariest part of all of it is it becomes normalized. And when you think about if we can normalize anything in a culture, that becomes the expected, the acceptable way of living. So I just want you to think for a minute, how does that characterize your day-to-day? Where are you paying unnecessary taxes because of an increase in busy? So let's contrast busy with productive. Productivity comes from a Latin word which means to lead forward. If we go back to the components of negative threat, instead of confusion that's created with busy, productivity provides clarity. Instead of this feeling of powerlessness that busy creates, where we don't feel like we have a lot of choice or control, productivity gives us freedom and autonomy. And instead of this idea of adverse consequences, of just creating more of the same, the hamster wheel, right? The running in circles, productivity is something that would help us to feel successful and progress, and something that we can measure and we can celebrate. So the 3 important pieces to moving from busy to productive is that we have absolute clarity, we have absolute alignment, and we have absolute accountability. Now, there are a couple of methodologies that I really like that allow you to organize your entire organization so that everyone is clear, everyone is in alignment, and everyone is held accountable. One of those is called the MIND methodology, and it's in Lee Benson's book, Your Most Important Number, where he encourages companies and teams to identify their most important number and the key drivers that would have the greatest impact on that most important number. A similar kind of methodology is outlined in Covey's The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Again, where there's a very clear goal, there's clear alignment, there is a way to track that visually, and there's a way to hold people accountable. So those are a couple of great methodologies you might want to check out. We kind of simplify it, and we use these 4 identifying markers, if you will, that we call DIVA. Okay, so D-I-V-A, yeah, 4. All right, so the D is done. All right, if you're writing this down, D is done. I is impact. V is visual or visible. And then the A is accountability. So let's walk through this for just a minute. D being done. Let's get really clear on what done looks like. So if that could be your most important number, done looks like we hit $1 million in sales this year, or $400 million in sales this year. The I is the impact. What are the activities that are going to have the greatest impact on what done looks like? The V is visual or visible. So how can we track that visually so we know at a moment's notice whether or not we're winning or we're losing? And then the A here is accountability. How are we holding everyone accountable to the activities that are going to have the greatest impact on what done looks like? So you can align an entire organization by these DIVA characteristics. But it also applies to other kind of smaller moments where we want great productivity. For example, with delegation. Delegation is a great example of how to use the DIVA criteria. First of all, being able to clearly state what done looks like. What are the activities that are going to have the greatest impact on done? How are we going to track this visually, keep it visible, even if that's on a calendar? And then A, how are we going to hold that person or that person holds us accountable? You can use this on project teams. There may be a special project team right now. And just before you begin any of the hows, we get really clear on what winning looks like. The D, what does done look like, so that every single person knows and can explain what done looks like. Then we identify what are those key drivers or key behaviors or key activities that are going to have the greatest impact on done. Everything else can go away. We want to really focus on what are the things that are going to so-called move the ball down the field farther than anything else. V, how are we going to create a scoreboard or some visual tracking system so that we know in a moment whether or not as a project team we're winning or we're behind. And then finally, accountability. How are we meeting every week so that each person gets an opportunity to share what they did last week, what they're going to do this week, and where do they need help? Where do they need assistance? Where do they need insight? This is also really helpful for you as a leader to observe how your team is doing, because are they asking the right questions? Let you know whether or not you're really developing that team along the way. You can even use these 4 characteristics in how you're tracking your personal goals. Let's say your goal is to get out of debt. Well, what does done look like? It looks like we have 0 debt by this date. What are the behaviors or the activities that are going to have the greatest impact on you getting out of debt? How are you going to track that visually? I've even heard of people putting like paper chains together, and every time they pay off $100, one of those paper links come off. Sometimes it's the reverse where they add it on, but it's a visual tracking at any time of whether or not we're winning or we're behind. And then accountability. How are we going to have accountability with another person or with a team to share, this is what I did last week, this is what I'm going to do this week, and this is where I need to go for help or insight or assistance. So thinking about the diva characteristics, right back to how do we eliminate this problem of threat? Well, when I'm clear on done, and when I know what behaviors or activities have the greatest impact, when I can track it visually, and I know that I'm going to be held accountable, it is lowering confusion, which is giving your brain its much needed clarity. It's actually lowering this feeling of powerlessness because we're very clear on what those activities are. And when you're clear on what activities have the greatest impact, that gives you a lot more autonomy and freedom. And it also lowers this worry, this feeling of negative or adverse consequences, because each week we're checking in and we get to celebrate what we've done and we get to be clear on what we're going to do. And there's an expectation that we're going to ask for help, for insight, and ask for assistance. So what does all of this have to do with you as a leader? Everything. You set the direction. Busy leaders create exhausted followers. I once heard a quote, something along the line of, when the leader catches a cold, the team gets the flu. But it really does start with you as a leader to clearly define what done looks like. Engage the team and help them develop the skill of identifying what are the key activities, actions, drivers that are going to have the greatest impact on done. Engage the team in creating a visual tracking system. And then each week have a cadence of accountability so that in your team meetings, each individual can share what they've done, you can celebrate, and then they talk about what they're going to do, and then reaching out for help, so that asking for help and carrying the burden and helping each other clear barriers becomes the way, the normal way within your team. And the most awesome thing of all of having this kind of alignment of productivity, the team gets to celebrate together, they get to win together, they're united, there's a sense of collaboration, there's a sense of belonging, and there's a sense of supporting each other. Productivity over busy, leading forward over anxiety. So I'd love to hear your comments. Put this into play. See what kind of results you get, because at the end of the day, every single thing that we talk about here, the big question is, so what? Did it help me get better results with less effort? That is always the goal. So let's stay focused on productivity, not busy, no matter what.